could talk a little bit about informing, or to say it another way, doing what I'm doing now. But I'll just say a few words about that. In that kind of presentation, you want to start with a promise, like I did for this hour that we're going through now. But then it comes to the question of how do you inspire people? I've given this talk for a long time, and a few years ago, our department chairman said, would you please give this talk to new faculty and be sure to emphasize what it takes to inspire students. And strangely, I hadn't thought about that question before, so I started a survey. I talked to some of my incoming freshman advisees, and I talked to senior faculty and everything in between about how they've been inspired. What I found from the incoming freshmen is that they were inspired by some high school teacher who told them they could do it. What I found in the senior faculty, they were inspired by someone who helped them to see a problem in a new way. And what I saw from everyone is that they were inspired when someone exhibited passion about what they were doing. Exhibited passion about what they were doing. Yeah, so that's one way to be inspiring. It's easy for me because, you know, I do artificial intelligence. How can you not be interested in artificial intelligence, right? I mean, if you're not interested in artificial intelligence, you're probably not interested in interesting things. So when I'm lecturing in my AI class, it's natural for me to talk about what I think is cool and how exciting some new idea is. So that's the kind of expression of passion that makes a difference while informing with respect to this question of inspiring. Oh yeah, and of course during this promise phase, you can also express how cool stuff is. Let me give you an example of a lecture that starts this way. I'm talking about resource allocation. It's the same sort of stuff you would think of when it's the same sort of ideas you would need if you're allocating aircraft to a flight schedule or trying to schedule a factory or something like that. But the example is putting colors on the states in the United States without any bordering states having the same color. So here goes. This is what I show in the beginning of the class. This is a way of doing that coloring. And you might say, well, why don't we wait till it finishes? Would you like to do that? No? Well, we're not going to wait till it finishes because the sun will have exploded and consumed the earth before this program finishes. But with a slight adjustment to how the program works, which I tell my students, you will understand in the next 50 minutes, this is what you get. Isn't that cool? You know, you got to be amazed by stuff that takes a computation from longer than the lifetime of the solar system into a few seconds. So that's what I mean by providing a promise up front and expressing some passion about what you're talking about. Well, the last item in this little block here is it has to do with what people think that they do at MIT. You ask faculty what the most important purpose is, and they'll say, well, the most important thing I do is teach people how to think. And then you say, oh, that's great. How do you teach people how to think? Blank stare. No one can quite respond to that part, that natural next question. So how do you teach people how to think? Well, I believe that we are storytelling animals, and that we start developing our story understanding and manipulating skills with fairy tales in childhood and continue on through professional schools like law, business, medicine, engineering, everything. And we continue doing that throughout life. So if that is what thinking is all about, then when you want to teach people how to think, you provide them with the stories they need to know, the questions they need to ask about those stories, mechanisms for analyzing those stories, ways of putting stories together, ways of evaluating how reliable the story is, and that's what I think you need to do when you teach people how to think. But that's all about education, and many of you here, not necessarily for that, but rather for this part, for persuading, which breaks down into several categories: oral exams, not shown; job talks, getting famous. I won't say much about oral exams, other than the fact that they used to be a lot scarier than they are today. In the old days, reading the literature in a foreign language was part of that, and there was a high failure rate. And when you look back on those failures, the most usual reason for people failing an oral exam is failure to situate and a failure to practice. By situate, I mean it's important to talk about your research in context. This is a problem that's being pursued all over the world. There hasn't been any progress before me in the past 30 years. Everyone is looking for a solution because it will have impact on so many other things. So that's situating in time and place and field. And then as far as practice is concerned, yes, practice is important, but that doesn't mean showing your slides to the people who share an office with. The problem with that is that if people know what you're doing, they will hallucinate that there's material in your presentation that isn't there. It isn't there. A variation on the same, by the way, is your faculty supervisor is not a very good person to help you debug a talk, because they, in fact, know what you're doing, and they will, in fact, hallucinate there's material in your presentation that isn't there. So you need to get together some friends who don't know what you're doing and have them, well, you start the practice session by saying, if you can't make me cry, I won't value you as a friend anymore. And then when you get to the faculty on a oral exam, it will be easy. You see, difficulty, or the amount of flack you'll get from somebody is proportional to age. The older somebody is, the more they understand where they are in the world. But the young people are trying to show the old people how smart they are, so they'll be vicious. So whenever you have an opportunity to have an examining committee that's full of people with gray hair, that's what you want. Well, that's just a word or two about something I haven't listed here. Let's get into the subject of job talks. So I was sitting in a bar many years ago in San Diego. I was a member of the Navy Science Board, and I was sitting with a couple of my colleagues on the board. Dolores Eder from the University of Colorado. She made me so jealous I could spit because she'd written 21 books and I'd only written 17. And then the other one was Bill Weldon from the University of Texas. He was a electromagnetism guy, and he knew how to use rail guns to drive steel rods through tank armor. These were interesting people. So I said, what do you look for in a faculty candidate? And within 1 microsecond, Dolores said, they have to show us they've got some kind of vision. Quickly followed by Bill, who said, they have to show us that they've done something. Oh, that sounds good, I said. And then I said to them, how long does the candidate have to establish these two things? What do you think? Well, compare your answer to theirs. Five minutes. So if you haven't expressed your vision, if you haven't told people that you've done something, in 5 minutes you've already lost. So you have to be able to do that. And let me just mention a couple of things in that connection. Here, which is, the vision is in part a problem that somebody cares about and something new in your approach. So the problem is understanding the nature of human intelligence, and the approach is asking questions about what makes us different from chimpanzees and Neanderthals. Is it merely a matter of quantity, or are we just a little bit smarter in some continuous way? Or do we have something that's fundamentally different that chimpanzees don't have, and Neanderthals either? And the answer is yes, we do have something different. We are symbolic creatures, and because we're symbolic creatures, we can build symbolic descriptions of relations and events. We can string them together and make stories. And because we can make stories, that's what makes us different. So that's my stump speech. That's how I start most of my talks on my own personal research. How do you express the notion that you've done something? By listing the steps that need to be taken in order to achieve the solution to that problem. You don't have to have done all of those steps, but you can say, here's what needs to be done. An example. Here's what needs to be done. We need to specify some behavior. We need to enumerate the constraints that make it possible to deal with that behavior. We have to implement a system because we're engineers and we don't think that we've understood something unless we can build it. And we've built such a system and we're about to demonstrate it to you today. That would be an example of enumerating a series of steps needed to realize the vision. So then, blah, 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 blah. And then you conclude by enumerating your contributions. It's kind of mirror of these steps, and it helps to establish that you've done something. So that's a kind of general purpose framework for doing a technical talk. Now, only a few more things left to do today. Getting famous is the next item on our agenda, because once you've got the job, you need to think a little bit about how you're going to be recognized for what you do.